Hello, my name is Luke Fannin. I am the writing specialist in student support services here at UWL, and I'm here today to talk to you about writing those tricky essays for your grad school applications. Now, before we get into it, I want to point out that what I'm going to talk about today is not by any means comprehensive. It won't cover all that there is to know or every possible situation involving application essays. As with many things, a lot depends on your specific situation, mainly what kind of program you're applying for. For example, the kind of essay prompts you'd see if you were applying to, say, a PhD program in mathematics would be very, very different from what you'd see if you're applying to like a master's in counseling program. But I can assure you that for the vast majority of programs, these essays are of vital importance to your application. So I strongly encourage you to approach this process as methodically and proactively as you possibly can. Treat it the way you would treat the most important academic project of your semester, because they are that important. Now, the caveat there is that some programs weigh these things a little less. Those programs tend to be like Masters of Fine Arts programs or other programs that might require you to submit a portfolio of your work that is judged and considered for your admissions process. And in those situations, the portfolio is much more important than these essays. You still have to take them seriously. You still have to do them, but they're certainly not as critical for those programs as in most others. That doesn't apply to very many people, very many programs. So, all right, let's get into it. First things first, let's talk about some of the things you can do before you even begin writing your essays, and maybe even before you've ever even seen the prompts. You can start out by taking a personal inventory. Now, by that I mean thinking about where you are as a student, as a person, as a future academic and professional. Ask yourself some simple questions. What am I most proud of? What have I accomplished in my life, not just as a student, but as a person, as a member of society, as a worker, all those things. What am I good at? What skills have I acquired? What qualities have I improved? And on the flip side, what am I not so good at? What do I still need to work on? Where do I need to improve? What have I improved on, and what have I not? What are my goals? What are my academic goals? What are my professional goals? What are my personal goals? Are you applying to a master's program with the hopes of eventually pursuing a PhD down the road, or are you going straight for the PhD? Are you going for a PhD so that you can remain in academia and be on faculty somewhere, or do you want to take that PhD into the private sector? Where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years? All those kinds of things. How do you stand out? What's unique about you? What makes you interesting? This is a hard one for a lot of people, but I guarantee you, no matter how milquetoast and dull you think you are, there is something to be said for what makes you you. And you have to spend some time articulating those thoughts so that you can say them when you need to. And finally, what have you had to endure? What have you had to overcome? What obstacles, what hurdles, what biases? How have you failed? How have you struggled with things? We're taught not to talk about failure, not to think about failure. But for most of us, it is as important, if not more important, than our successes. And I guarantee you, in most of these essays, you'll have the opportunity to talk about how you failed and how you've learned from it. So get comfortable doing that. And finally, what do you have that might need to be explained? Are there inconsistencies or deficiencies in your academic record that need explaining? Did you have a gap in your schooling or in your work history that you need to talk about? These aren't necessarily things you have to address in personal statements or application essays, but oftentimes these applications will have a separate question where you can sort of talk about extenuating circumstances. And so if there are any, think about how you would address them, start forming those thoughts so that you're prepared to talk about them when the time comes. And with taking this personal inventory, you can write it down. You can just think about it when you lay in bed at night or while you're in the shower or for a run or whatever it is you do. It doesn't really matter so long as you spend a good amount of time deliberating over these kinds of questions and being absolutely honest with yourself and really preparing yourself for taking some of these ideas into your application essays. Okay, so now that part's done. I mean, it's not really, because you're gonna have to keep thinking about all that stuff all through this process, but we're ready to move on to the next step at least, which is actually looking at the prompt. So most program applications are going to ask you some pretty specific questions. They're not all identical. Some have multiple, it'll be 4 or 5 or 6 questions listed out in the prompt. Some are much more general. But as you carefully read those questions, read those prompts, take some time to observe what kind of statement they're asking for. And if that's the first time you're even hearing something like that, what kind of statement, what does that mean? That's what we're going to talk about right now. So the basic 2 kinds of statements for these application essays are the personal statement, which I'm sure you heard of, and the statement of purpose, which I'm also sure you've heard of, and you probably never really thought twice that they might be different things. And they are very similar in many ways. And honestly, most are some kind of hybrid of these 2, but there are some subtle differences that you need to take into account. We'll talk about those now. So starting with the personal statement, it is backward facing. And by that I mean it's looking into your past and into everything that's happened up until this point in your life. A personal statement is basically asking 2 questions. Why am I interested in this field or this program or this career path? And why am I perfectly suited for this particular program to which I'm applying? When in answering those questions, you're going to focus on your various experiences, your achievements, the development of the skills and qualities and attributes that, number 1, made you want to do this, and number 2, make you a good candidate for this program. So I always like to think of this part of the statement as the origin story, like how Bruce Wayne became Batman, but in your case, how you decided to become an occupational therapist or a future counselor or whatever the case may be. So that might be a very tangible memory in your mind of knowing when you wanted to do this thing. And it might not be. It might be one of those kind of just kind of happened one day and I ended up on this path. But that's another thing you have to spend some time thinking about, processing, and be prepared to articulate. On the other hand, we have the statement of purpose. So where the personal statement looks backward into the past, the statement of purpose looks forward into the future. It's asking, what are your professional and academic goals? How does this program help you achieve those goals? In answering those questions, you're going to focus specifically on your academic interests, your professional interests, your research interests. This is going to be an opportunity for you to show off what you know about the program, and where having done your homework beforehand will be really important. is you can talk about specific faculty who work in this program, who you can see being mentors to you. You can do conduct research alongside of them, pursue your own interests under their guidance. If the program has any specific specialties that appeal to you, you can talk about those here. So always important to know this stuff beforehand. Maybe you chose a school or a program because of its location, but make sure you get to know what the specifics of the program are so that you can talk about them at length here. Now, whichever kind it is, it's hard. Most of us don't like talking about ourselves, much less writing about ourselves at length. And it's especially difficult to cram a lifetime's worth of experiences into a couple of pages in any meaningful way. So naturally, the instinct is to generalize and summarize as much as possible in order to fit it all in. Unfortunately, that's the wrong instinct most of the time. When you do that, you lose all of the detail, you lose all the specifics. And for your essay to have any life at all, it needs details, it needs specifics. It can't just be bogged down in generalizations. So details. You might have guessed they're important. It is going to be tempting to say, I worked at this job and I volunteered at this place and I had this great internship and I presented this research at a conference, and do all of that in one paragraph. But if you do all of that without providing more specifics, then all you're really doing is narrating your resume, which obviously they don't need because they've already got it. And that's not what this essay is for. Likewise, it might be tempting to rattle off a list of characteristics and attributes and skills in an effort to sound a bit more impressive. I read a lot of sentences that are like, I'm dedicated and hardworking and passionate and a great team player. And all that stuff does sound okay in a certain superficial way, but for that very reason, everyone does it. Everyone says it. And if you don't do it in a way that distinguishes yourself by, for example, illustrating how you came to develop those qualities and skills, then you're just doing something that anyone can do, just saying a bunch of stuff about themselves with nothing to back it up. So the long and short of it is quality over quantity. There's more about you. You've done more, and there's more inside of you than can possibly be talked about in this short space that's allowed to you. So it is much better, more powerful, more meaningful to focus in on one or two or three little stories, little experiences, and talk about those in vivid detail than it is to just kind of gloss over a whole lot more stuff, because even though you have to leave a lot out, you're getting a lot more out of those few things than you are out of the many things. Above all, be memorable. That's kind of the nice way of saying don't be boring. But if the admissions committee is bored reading your essay, it doesn't matter how great an application you've put together. It doesn't matter how great a candidate you otherwise are. They're not going to remember a thing about you if you're boring them with your essay. And if you're generalizing and summarizing all these experiences, I guarantee you they will be bored. That brings us to this slide. It's a short one, but possibly the most important one in this thing. So in order to write a successful essay, you have to become a bit of a storyteller. And I mean that 100% literally. For a second, stop and put yourself in the shoes of the folks on these admissions committees. Think about what it must be like to read hundreds of these essays one after another. Imagine how they all start to sound the same. Like 95% of students applying to a given graduate program all have roughly the same bachelor's degree, all took roughly the same courses in their undergraduate programs, all had roughly the same practical experiences to get them to this point. It must be kind of mind-numbing to read all of those one after another. So you have to set yourself apart. Certainly, those experiences, those classes, everything you learned, it's important. It's what got you here. But it has to be about you. It has to be about how those experiences, those classes, the knowledge you acquired, the skills you developed, how they shaped you and got you to this point, set you on this path. Remember, this is not your resume. You're not just explaining which relevant experiences you've completed, like some kind of checklist. That is where it comes back to storytelling. And even though we use the word tell in there, I said tell stories right there in the heading. What you're actually doing is showing. That's the more important part. If you ever took a creative writing class, you've heard this phrase, show, don't tell. It means bring your reader into it. Don't just explain it to them, but bring them into it and show them what happened. Bring them to that time and place. Demonstrate that powerful, transformative moment that affirmed every choice you made up until that point. The moment that sent you down this path and you knew there was no going back. It has to be real, it has to be human, and it has to jolt that admissions committee into realizing that there is a real person behind these words, not just academic records and a CV and whatever. Personal, personable, honest, vulnerable. Do not be afraid to let it all hang out a little bit. So that's the hard part, quite possibly the hardest part of writing these essays and writing them well. If there's an interview as part of the process and getting into your graduate program, imagine that this essay is setting you up for that interview. And you're going to say some things in this essay that when they read it, they say, oh, that's really interesting. I want to ask her about that. That's how you be memorable. That's how you connect with them. That's how you start to form a relationship just through your words, never having met these people. Okay, let's talk about length. Of course, you should pay attention to whatever length limit they attach to the essay. It might say 2 or 3 pages. It might say 500 words. It might say 8,000 characters counting spaces. Whatever it is, you need to know it and pay attention to it. But try not to worry about it, at least for your first couple of drafts, because it can be so limiting to write within those restrictions when you're still trying to figure out what's important, what's meaningful, which experiences and memories and stories you can best express yourself in for the purposes of the prompt. So maybe you're going to write twice as much or 3 times as much as you have to for your first draft. And then you can call it back a little at a time. And of course, once you get to your final draft, absolutely do not go over the limit. Some people think, well, I just went over by 2 lines onto that 4th page, or I'm only 50 words over the limit, or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's not an automatic rejection. Maybe they're not going to dismiss your application out of hand, but I say, why take the chance? If it takes you an extra hour to edit it down to get it under that limit, it's an hour well spent. If you're dealing with a character count anyway, you almost certainly be pasting your essay into a text box in an online application portal at that character limit. And so anything that exceeds that won't be included anyway. So you have to stick to those limits. On the flip side, you also don't want to be too far under the limit. If you're significantly less than the limit, they might just suspect that you have recycled or reused your essay in some way. Maybe that you wrote it for a different program and you're just reusing it now because you think it's close enough. You don't really want to run the risk of them thinking you didn't take this seriously enough to write an essay just for them. So try to get reasonably close to that limit without going over or being too far under. Sometimes there's no limit specified. In those cases, aim for the 2 to 4 double-spaced page range. Of course, some prompts are like, they list out 8 separate questions, and it might not be possible to answer them all in 4 pages, in which case you're almost certainly expected to go over. But that's just a general rule of thumb to aim for that range when no limit is provided. This shouldn't have to be said. No, it seems perfectly obvious, but it happens a lot. Address the prompt completely. If you're applying to multiple programs, and I'm sure a lot of you are, it will be very tempting to save yourself some work and simply make a few little changes to one essay and submit it for a different program, even though the prompt is subtly different. Close enough is usually not good enough, and I guarantee you most programs are going to be very sensitive to the fact that you might be reusing or recycling essays. They're going to be on the lookout for that, and if you think it's close enough, it's probably not. You certainly can and should recycle and reuse portions of your essay. You don't have to reinvent the wheel for every application you send out, but you just want to be extra careful, extra cautious, so that you are making sure that you address everything and that you have fully answered the questions that they are asking. And finally, ask for help. You are not in this alone. Ask your professors, your advisors, other folks you know and trust to read through your statements, give you thorough, honest, critical feedback. Ask your friends too if you trust that they won't pull their punches, but in my experience, friends just want to make you feel good, and they can be helpful, but not as helpful as you need them to be. And of course, you can ask me. This is my job. This is why I am here. And I love talking to students about grad school application essays. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So you can connect with me via Microsoft Teams. You can shoot me an email, schedule an appointment with me through Navigate. You can find all the links to do that stuff. Since I can't really put that up here, you can find all those links on the SSS website. And actually, my email is on the first page of this thing if you want to go back. But get in touch with me anytime. And we also have a team of peer tutors who can help you too if my schedule doesn't work for you. So I hope you'll reach out if you have questions. I hope to read your essays at some point, and I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.